everybody, and welcome. Happy Thursday to you all. I'm so excited to have you back, and I am so excited to introduce today's guest to you. Please welcome Erika Steeves. Erika is a freelance copy editor for indie authors and publishers and is with us today to talk a little bit more about the copy editing process. So thank you so much for being with us. I'm so excited.
I am likewise very excited, and thank you so much for inviting me to chat about this.
Of course. So now tell us a little bit about how you got into freelance copy editing and proofreading.
Sure. So it's quite a circuitous path, but if I go back about 11 years, I started in traditional publishing. So I was hired as a publishing intern at a small press. And that's pretty much where I learned the ropes of publishing, was in-house. After the internship, I got a job there and it was amazing. I learned so much from the managing editor. But then after that year, I decided freelancing was more my groove. And so I started my own business. And since then, I've been copy editing and proofreading. And it was not always for fiction or within fiction that I was working. So I started in the traditional publishing realm, I was doing fiction, but once I started on my own, I really started in academic and nonfiction books. And as a copy editor, that has, and we'll get into this probably, that has a very different scope of practice than in fiction. So I came from the nonfiction world in my freelance business and into the fiction world, I guess 4 years ago now. And so now I'm really focusing in on speculative fiction, science fiction, horror, all the genres I love to read the most. And that is really the focus of my business. And especially with indie authors, I absolutely love copy editing and proofreading for indie authors and indie publishers. It's basically a dream destination now that I've arrived. I feel like I did a lot of stuff. I tried a lot of things. It's all for the best, but now I feel like I'm really where I want to be.
I have to say, excuse me. I have to say, God bless you for loving copy editing, because as we talked about, I am a developmental editor at heart. I love storytelling and I love going to my authors and saying, what about this? Or what if the character did this? And getting the story into a stronger shape and being able to help with plotting and just like development and everything like that. While I can do copy editing, that is a technical and powerful skill to have that I do not have the patience for on an everyday basis. So you have my utter awe and joy that you do that, so that we can I can send people to you to say, here you go, here is this expert in commas, because I just put commas wherever I want them to be when I write.
Well, yeah, and I feel the same way about developmental editors and people who work with the big picture. It's a really significant skill set. And that's the beauty of editing. We all can work together, and there are so many types of editors and skill sets that complement each other. So yeah, I feel the same awe in the other direction.
So now most people think of copy editing as, in actually just my joke, as fixing commas, as fixing spelling errors, everything like that. But it's so much more than that as well. So talk about sort of the wide scope of copy editing and how that's so necessary for publishing.
Right. So there is the stereotype of, the copy editor with the red pen and, slashing the manuscript to bits and all that stuff. And it's there, I guess, for a reason. But really, my take on copy editing is to have a more flexible mindset. So yes, of course, there are the technicalities, there are, the placement of the comma and all that stuff. But we're looking at hyphenation, capitalization, consistency across the manuscript, in all those levels, numbering, like just the details at the sentence level that no one really needs to know about, but that the copy editor is literally checking and double checking all of those things. That's one aspect of copy editing. That's like the mechanical, technical aspect. But especially when I work with indie authors, there are line editing considerations that come in too. It's kind of like a blend that a lot of editors do with indie authors. And the line editing stuff is like smoothing out the sentence, making sure that it's really hard to in the moment describe all the things that go through your mind when you're reading and in this mode. But yeah, so there's the technical side, but then there's like the sentence structures and seeing like word echoes and seeing things that are repeated, or like on the dev editing side, you might be working with authors to move things around. And so like when copy editing comes around, I can see the little pieces that need to be addressed, that, oh, okay, yes, we did move that thing, so this detail doesn't come up yet. So there's a lot of that tracking of detail for consistency across a manuscript. But then the flexible mindset comes in when it's like, especially in fiction, hey, I know the rules, but it's okay to have sentence fragments. It's okay. This is the author's style, is this particular flavor of, it's hard to describe. The flexible mindset is that, yes, the technicalities are there. There are overt errors and typos, but then there is respecting the author's style and not, kind of rewriting sentences and tweaking things because of a random pet peeve, So that's probably quite a mouthful of an answer, but I tend to like the idea of getting all those details down, but also being flexible and knowing when to let things go and when to push for querying the author about something, but always having in mind, like, they have a style, there is reasons behind everything that's going on here, and it's up to me to be curious about that.
Yeah, and I think you've touched on excuse me, you've touched on so many of my questions, so we're gonna branch off in about 8 different ways from that answer. So first and foremost, I want to sort of clarify for anybody watching this. So you, as a copy editor, can do some line edits. A line editor may cross over into copy editing, but those are 2 different things. So when you hire somebody for your indie book, you want to clarify with them exactly what they're going to do for you, because you don't want to hire a line editor and assume they're going to fix all your grammatical errors, and vice versa. You don't want to assume a copy editor is going to do a ton of line edits, because technically speaking, as you said, it's a little bit of a feel thing whether or not a copy editor is going to fix a fragment of a sentence, because it's a style thing, or whether it's incorrect. And versus a line editor would, leave that because it's a feel thing, even if it is incorrect. And so there's a little bit of a balance to be found there. So I think that's really important to sort of note for people that are looking to hire for services. I know on your website it mentions that you do a sample edit, so that's probably something that you sort of give a feel for there, right?
Yeah, the sample edit is definitely where the author can get a feel for whether the level of feedback, the level of intervention, how I comment, how I give feedback is in line with what they're expecting and who they want to work with. So getting that right fit, yes, is very, very important.
And I think it's vital that, and I don't personally know any professional editors, freelance or otherwise, that don't offer some sort of free sample, not only obviously on our end so that we know that we're able to help the indie authors, but also because then you can see how you're going to work together in that partnership, and the author gets to see what they're getting, because and I'm sure you've experienced this as well, but even I've experienced this on a developmental editing side, where authors are very nervous to come to me because they're afraid I'm going to rewrite their chapters or change their voice or anything like that. So I know you touched on this a little bit, but talk a little bit about, copy editing and proofreading and balancing that sort of technical aspect with making sure you're keeping the author voice. Have you run into any issues with that or anything?
So the the balancing of the technical and the authorial voice. The way I like to think of it for myself is I like to think of the editor as the bridge between the author and the future readers. And so my job is to anticipate any of the pitfalls or any of the places where the reader will be taken out of the story. So whether it's I notice inconsistencies in spelling or inconsistencies in details relating to characteristics of a character or setting, like all of these little details that may or may not be inconsistent, they add up. And so those are the places where I'm really looking to smooth things out and to correct any obvious speed bumps so that the reader, the eventual reader, always stays immersed in the world. So that's the thing. I'm always thinking, this author is incredible and their imagination has spawned this entire universe, right? So I'm here in awe of all this. I am taking all of these notes. That's another thing I'm going to mention. The style sheet, the copy editor's style sheet is like the place where we track all of the details that we've checked, all of the, anything that is talking about a character or a place or a timeline that could be made inconsistent later. Like we're really trying to make sure that continuity is key, is upheld everywhere. And so the balance is in always keeping that in mind. I think that's how I do it, is I'm thinking, okay, there's the future reader and there's the author who has their vision. My job is to refine and polish this text so that the vision can be, the best it can be for the readers. And so if I know that something is technically incorrect according to the Chicago Manual of Style, however, it doesn't really take away from anything, and I'm at a loss for an example, but the idea is the copy editor is not trying to hammer the story into the style. Like Chicago Manual of Style says this, therefore I'm going to, rewrite your whole book according to all these rigid grammar rules. The rules are there, and we're going to impose, quote unquote, the ones that, they're clearly errors. But like we've been saying, there's a lot of subjectivity there. And I think it takes a lot of practice to know when to let some of those things go, especially for perfectionists who might be like, but no, I must do the things I see. Like, there's a lot more I could say on that, but I think it's just respecting the vision and also correcting what needs to be corrected, and knowing the difference, knowing the nuance in all these pieces at play.
Yeah, well, and again, I think it comes into play with the sample edit for authors, getting that back, being able to see how rigid the copy editor is, because I think a lot of that comes with experience and time, learning how to let the author express and have the story evolve the way they want it to, but also make sure, not, as you said, not that it's sticking to these rigid standards, but that you are correcting it in a way that is clear and is just helping the reader. So I think that's a really vital piece of that. And I think tying to that especially, which is why I find it so fascinating that you went from academic to sci-fi and fantasy, because you basically made that jump where it's rigid, this is correct, this is how you do it, to made up words and languages and different ways to hyphenate. And oh my gosh, there's so much creativity, not only in writing and editing the story of a world, but even just in the grammatical structure. That's got to be just mind-bendingly, to me it's mind-bendingly terrifying. To you it's probably mind-bendingly fun. So I guess talk a little bit about some of the more either fun or challenging aspects of copy editing in sci-fi and fantasy, whether that's, copy editing as a whole, or whether that's the, tracking things on a style sheet for an epic fantasy. I can't even imagine how lengthy that style sheet gets,
Can
and
be
anything
lengthy.
like that.
Yeah, I going from nonfiction to fiction has been interesting, and I think the style sheet is key for me. And this is where I'm gonna nerd out a little bit because I'm obsessed with style sheets, and I'm obsessed with like keeping track of all the details across an epic story like that. But I realize now that one of the things I really enjoyed about the academic side of things was like maintaining the consistency and making sure, the clarity was there and tracking things in my style sheet. But I didn't realize how fun it could be until I switched to fiction. I did some training, and then I was like, oh, now I get to track, all the characters and everything about them, and basically like making a family tree, sort of making like a whole timeline, plotting the timeline, making sure things are not inconsistent. And I think a lot of people don't realize that about copy editors, is that they're keeping track of these on a style sheet. Honestly, like I've talked with so many people who are like, I don't even know what that is. Like, I didn't realize that copy editors did that. I thought, like you said, I thought they were just looking at the commas. And it's like, yeah, we're looking at the commas, but we're also looking at like, hey, this character's eye color has changed from this to this over the chapters. Or one example from a space opera I edited recently. This is a very specific example, but it was like, in the scene, a character was eating soup, but then later in the scene they started eating it again, like little things where I'm tracking the continuity, just like a script supervisor would do in the movies, right? Like there's always that person who's like, wait a minute, you did this with your right hand, so you have to make sure that you do it again and take 26 with your right hand. So that's sort of what the copy editor is doing within this fictional universe, is making sure all of those threads um, are where they should be, so that the future reader has an entirely seamless, immersive experience. They don't realize they're reading, they picture, the whole story in their mind. They're not jarred, they're not jarred out of the story because they're like, wait a minute, something's wrong here. And they might not even necessarily know exactly, but like there are certain details that jar people out, or sentence structures being the same, and the feeling of reading becoming monotonous. There's all sorts of things that copy and line editors at the sentence level are looking at and evaluating with that reader's experience in mind.
Yeah, I love your example of the TV and movies, because I think all of us have had that experience watching our favorite TV show or a movie for the, the eighth time, and you're like, they were flipping the page with this hand, but now it's this hand, or the book is now suddenly closed, and they were reading just like two scenes ago. And I love that, because it's such a visual way of describing, I think, a lesser known aspect of copy editing, which is exactly what you said, which is most people, they're like, oh, well, you're just, why can't I just hire Grammarly, which is a whole other conversation. Why can't I just, have Grammarly, which you totally can. You 100%, you should, have whatever service you on your computer or whatever that you want. But there's a human aspect to it as well that is not going to get caught by a computer, that are the more intricate details and aspects of that, especially within science fiction and fantasy, whether that comes to unique spelling and language, whether that comes to, as you said, the family trees. All I'm imagining, and I know copy editors that do this, you mentioned family trees, like there are copy editors, and I've even done this when I've copy edited. You literally, like, it's not even on the style sheet, but I have like a notebook where I'm like, okay, this person had these two kids, and this person had these two kids, and they have blue eyes and everything like that. And
or like the different species of aliens.
Yes.
And all of the different, characters that come up that may or may not be human.
And cultures within those different alien species and everything like that. I mean, science fiction alone, I mean, you literally have a universe to deal with. So
Yes.
it is something that there's no way to hold all that in your brain. It's part of the reason why
Yeah,
I'm in awe of authors as well, because I'll come up with
I
all of
know.
this. It's like, oh my gosh. But it's, it's one of those things where, especially in sci-fi fantasy, it's needed, it's necessary. So for authors that are currently writing or working on their publishing journey, when do you recommend authors start thinking about reaching out to you, finding a copy editor, sort of adding that to the process?
Well, certainly you're going to want to hire the copy editor after you've finished developmental editing and um any of like the revisions phase, beta readers, all that. So, but you're still going to want to reach out quite far in advance to when you want to actually have the editing done, because a lot of editors book up quite far in advance. So I would say, like, as soon as possible, really, like, just start looking for people that you like their work, you want to work with, reach out, um really as soon as you can, just to ask them, like, hey, what is your schedule looking like, just to know, like, okay, you're booked out 7 months in advance, or maybe they do have an opening in 2 months, and you could be like, okay, that makes sense. So reach out much sooner than you think. You can't just be like, oh, hey, I want to start next week. It's possible that might work, but you don't want to risk them being like, well, that's not possible at all. So yeah, there's a lot of demand.
I always feel terrible. I do always have authors that reach out to me and they're like, I'm so excited. I finished my book and I'd love for you to start like next week or even like next month. And I'm like, so I I want to, because I love the enthusiasm and I want to keep your
Mhm.
momentum going. But if you finish
Yes.
this sort of on a whim and you didn't plan this out ahead of time, I'm gonna need more time for that. And I think, handling that schedule can be a bit complicated because obviously the creative process it's very malleable. It is tentative at best. And that's not only from the author side of things, finishing the story, but developmental editing. I know personally, I've run into things sometimes where I have to go to an author and say, okay, I know I said 2 weeks, but this is complicated, it's going to actually be 3 and things like that. So
Mhm.
it's important to reach out ahead of time, but also give yourself some leeway in the schedule. And there's a lot of great information online about sort of schedules of when to have beta readers, when to go to a dev editor, when to go to a copy editor, everything like that. I will say one of the things, and I don't know if you agree or not, but even as a developmental editor, I would say to all the authors watching out there, if you have to choose, I would choose a copy editor over a developmental editor. And I'll tell you why. And then I want to know what your thoughts are. And
We're
I'll tell
all
you why. And
ears.
it's because authors spend weeks, months, years thinking about the story, plotting it out, everything, to the point where sometimes I ask questions and it'll make the story stronger if they, focus on this or cut this or do this. And that's not to say that people don't need a dev edit. If you can have a dev edit, have a dev edit. Please have a dev edit. It's so helpful. But for the average reader, while a dev edit is going to help and make it a more seamless experience, a more enjoyable experience, they may or may not notice whether or not the main character changed or not. They may just not love the character as much as they would have if you had done the developmental editing. But they are certainly going to be more confused if your language changes or if your dialogue isn't punctuated correctly or
Right.
anything like that. So it's very funny. I have that conversation with authors all the time because editing is expensive. It is an investment. It is especially an investment if you have multiple editors, as I highly recommend people do, not only for getting multiple eyes on a manuscript, but also because people uh, have different, specialties. I specialize in story dev editing, you specialize in copy editing. um it's one of those things where it's going to be expensive. It's an investment in your publishing career if you are an
Mhm.
indie. But copy editing all the way, copy editing, and that's always so surprising to people.
Yeah, and you just really want that pair of eyes that has not seen the previous versions of things. So like as the author, they like you said, they have been thinking about this universe for potentially years. And so they know everything. And the copy editor slash line editor, they are coming in and like seeing what's really there, like seeing what's really on the page and how the sentences are really flowing into each other and how the scene is really developed. Whereas sometimes the author might remember like 10 drafts ago stuff happening and then not realizing, oh, wait, oh, yeah, that doesn't make sense now because I cut this scene. Oh, yeah. But like it takes the sentence level editor to ask that question because they don't know. They go, I know that something's confusing, something's missing. And then what ends up being the missing thing is, oh, yeah, I cut something and it no longer makes sense. So that's the continuity piece. And that's, at the scene level, at the sentence level, across the manuscript. The copy editor is like the person that is just seeing everything for what it is and for what the reader will be seeing and making sure that the reader has the most seamless experience possible. So yes, I agree. Like it's crucial in the publishing process to have the sentence level edit there as part of the bigger process.
So now, for authors that are working their way towards hiring a copy editor or going to do so in the future, or even thinking about doing it at some point, is there anything you'd recommend either that they know or that they can do ahead of time to either help make their manuscript better or help make your job easier? Do you have any sort of advice like that for authors?
Certainly to do as much self-editing as you can to make it, to use whatever tools at your disposal to make the manuscript as clean as possible, as well formatted as possible. Um, I think a lot of authors and writers think, oh, well, that's what the editor is for. Like they'll fix everything, which is true. However, it'll cost more because it's more time. So the cleaner you can make the manuscript up to what you can do, the better. And so that's one thing. The other thing is um to reframe your idea of your relationship with the editor, not as antagonistic, not as they're coming in to destroy everything and they're gonna, rip it to shreds and I'm like just combative. Think of it more as we're creative collaborators, and your copy editor, if there's a good fit, is gonna be your biggest fan, is going to be totally cheerleading you on, is going to, you know, is going to help you see things that you can't see anymore because you're too close to the manuscript. And just think of them as uh yeah, as part of your creative team and not as someone to fear or someone to, think is going to come in there and like wreck everything. No, no, no.
Well, and one of the things I think that's such an important thing to point out, because one of the things I love most about being a freelancer and working with indie authors is you as
Mhm.
the author have the control. So you
Mhm.
hired me to give you outside advice and expert opinion. Here's what I'm telling you I think should be changed, whether it's on the copy editing side or the dev side. But as far as what you actually decide to change, it's going to maybe sound a little callous. I don't care. Like, that's entirely, I mean, yes, I do have I have a stake in it. Like I want the book to be stronger, and I know from my experience that the things I recommend are going to help with that. But especially on the copy editing side of things, if it's something that you really feel is true to your style, the author is fully able to reject those changes, right? So it's I think that's important, that you're not coming across as, oh well, you're wrong. There is no,
Yes.
oh well, you're wrong. It's, here is what's technically following the Chicago Manual of Style. Is this what you want? Or,
Yes.
anything of that sort, and coming at it as exactly what you said, like a creative, collaborative sort of partnership, if you will. I think
Hmm.
that's absolutely the best way to do that. And then as far as self-editing goes, the biggest thing I can add to that is yes. Absolutely, yes. And I will say this, for both, again, copy editing and story editing, self-editing and going through it several times is so helpful, not just because the editor is going to do, like, you do it not just because the editor is going to do it. And as you said, it will be more expensive, or it will take longer. There are obviously the more the I don't want to say consequences. Consequences isn't the right word. But there are the differences in that way. If you don't do the self-editing, you're going to have those things, but also the cleaner it is, the more that we're going to be able to see and find, the better
Exactly.
product you're going to have. If I have to spend, I actually just had this not too long ago. So I had a survey, I did a developmental edit, and I had 2 rounds. And this author, absolutely wonderful. I adore her. She's great. This one, though, was a book that was sort of a rush. So she had given me her very, very first draft. So she had not gone through it at all. I've worked with her plenty, though. So it was something that we had sort of that mutual trust, that creative collaboration, where she wasn't worried about it. And so went through it, gave her my edit letter, had her make a bunch of changes. And then through the second round, I gave her more feedback, and it was some pretty heavy feedback, and not in a bad way, but she came back to me and she was a little just a little out of sorts, because she was like, now I still have these big edits. I was expecting sort of more minor changes, or just more confirmation that
Hmm.
these things had worked, that my changes had worked. And I was like, well, you know what the problem is that now that you had all the bigger stuff moved out of the way and corrected, now we could drill down to the deeper story level to see there are still these pretty big issues that you can fix to take the story even further. And I
Hmm.
think that's a huge thing for copy editing as well, because if you as the copy editor are focused on fixing the punctuation for dialogue every time there's dialogue in a story, which is a massive amount, you're not going to have the time or the brain space to get into the more nuanced changes that you need. So I think self-editing is something that, you're exactly right. Authors are like, I'm not gonna edit, I'm hiring someone to edit for me. It's like, please do both, please do both.
Yes.
So
Exactly.
it's been crazy. So you
Yeah.
offer copy editing, you offer
Hmm.
proofreading,
Yes.
line editing. Am I missing anything else?
No, that's it.
Of those 3, and I'm putting you on the spot here. Of those 3, do you have a favorite, and why?
So I think I can say currently I love a good proofread because, and admittedly, when we're talking working with indie authors, there's less actual proofreading, as in like a PDF of a print ready document that's been designed and styled. Usually I'm doing copy editing and line editing in Word, but I love a good proofread because I feel like I'm doing the final pass. I'm seeing this manuscript that's come through all of these stages, I'm seeing it as a designed book. I'm seeing it, I'm like one of the first people, other than the designer, I guess, to read this book as a reader almost. So the proofreader is like that person who's polishing any last little tiny things that have gone potentially awry in the formatting stage. So that I really love that role as like the final quality check. However, that being said, because I'm obsessed with style sheets and the details, I think the blend of line and copy editing that I do, but mainly let's just say copy editing and the style sheets that I make, like that's probably where I would land. I don't know. I guess I answered. I love everything that I do, but yeah, the proofreading, I really must say I enjoy that piece a lot when I get to do it. I do it more for publishers, but
sure. I can see that, because as we were just talking about, editors, as much as we do get to read books all the time, we don't really get to read finished books very often, or at least that you have to set time aside to read finished books. So I can imagine how reading something to proofread it, where you're getting to see it look like a real book, even if it's still on the screen, obviously, getting to see it like a real book and getting to sort of lose yourself in that experience, even though you're still paying attention, obviously, and you're making that check, but you're not, stopping every sentence going, is that comma correct? And, oh, I need to double check XYZ. You're able to sort of enjoy, I don't want to say enjoy the process a bit more, but lose yourself in the process a bit more, I guess is the better way to say that. I can totally see how that would be a ton of fun.
Yeah, well, the copy editing and the proofreading really go hand in hand, because the proofreader is checking a lot of stuff against the style sheet that was made by the copy editor. So it's nice to see all the threads put together, and then the next level is, hey, it's published. All the readers are going to get to see all the work that's been put in.
Now, do you commonly do, I know I recommend to my authors, obviously having somebody different for a developmental edit and a copy edit, as we talked about. Do you also recommend that for a copy edit and a proofread, or do you regularly do a copy edit and then have people come back to you for a proofread, so then you're already sort of familiar with the style sheet, with how things worked, and then you get to sort of see what they changed in the final product, which I think would be really neat. But then you're also getting having fewer eyes on a manuscript. Do you have a recommendation for that? How do you normally work?
I would ideally recommend having it be two different people. So if I'm copy editing and then the author wants to go ahead with a proofread, I would recommend someone else for them. And vice versa. If they had a copy editor and they want a final check proofread, then I can do that. So yes, I would recommend having it be two different eyes, because if I've copy edited something, I'm almost too familiar with it now that when I'm reading the final PDF, I feel like my brain is still going to be potentially glossing over things because of the familiarity with the text. However, I have in the past, if there's enough time in between, like let's say there's a significant chunk of time between copy editing and proofreading, then it might be okay. But just in an ideal scenario, you would have different people for those two different tasks. But recently anyways, I'm doing more copy and line editing for indie authors, and more proofreading, like the technical proofreading for publishers. So that's the ideal answer, is different people, just so you can get as many eyes as possible.
Right.
On the manuscript.
It definitely, it makes sense to me. It occurred to me to ask, because we were talking about, obviously you do both, and I was thinking about it, and I was like, there are many times when I don't have time to go back to my author's finished books and read all the changes that they made. So I think that would be a fun thing to do, to be able to see. That's why I like doing multiple passes, because then they've already change some things, and I get to see sort of how the book is evolving, versus sometimes people come for one pass, they take my advice and they run, and I see the book comes out, and I'll post about it and talk to them about it, everything like that, but I have no idea if they took my advice or not. So it's kind of a hilarious, it's very different than in traditional publishing, where you sort of, as the editor and publisher, you have more control of, yes, I want you to fix this, or yes, I want you to change this, which is, depending on how you feel, a pro or a con, as far as, then in indie publishing, you're making all those decisions on your own. So it's very funny to see how people embrace that, and whether or not they take the advice. So,
but that's one thing I wanted to emphasize again. You mentioned that the edits are suggestions, and I think that's one of the key things I would love people to remember, is that yes, your editor is marking up the manuscript, but the author has the final say. It's your book, so you get to decide. And like we were saying with the technical side, yes, like if I'm punctuating the dialogue, I mean, there's a very real reason for why I'm suggesting a comma versus a period. But like, if there are other more subtle things that I'm suggesting, I will typically kind of explain my thinking in a tactful, constructive way. And then it's up to the author to be like, you know what, I get that, but I'm not going to do that particular suggestion. And that's completely okay. That is great. It's up to, they have final say.
And I think a perfect example of this, so I am self-admitted, I am an abuser of the M dash. I abuse it all the time. I use it way too often. Love an M dash. Absolutely love it. Versus being able to, mixing it up and using, semicolon, colon, sort of making my prose a bit differently. And that's because that's my style. That's how I sort of type and write and speak,
right.
Everything like that. And so if I were to send something to you, you would see that and go, oh my gosh, look at all these M dashes.
But also, I probably would be like, okay, M dashes. Then I wouldn't suggest like peppering your entire thing with semicolons everywhere. I'd be like, that doesn't really fit the style. But I might be like, well, here you've got 7 M dashes, in these 3 sentences. Here's a way that, that you might consider changing it up a bit here, like that kind of thing.
Mixing it up.
I would respect the heavy M dash use and be like, okay, let's go with this.
Let's do it. And I think that's the perfect example, where it's like, you're going to come in, you're going to say, do you want this? And I can either say, yep, that's my style, or I can be like, oh, you're right, I shouldn't have. It's sort of like, and this obviously leans more towards line editing than copy editing, but it's sort of like the conversation I have a lot of times with my authors with like short declarative sentences. It's like they have like 8 of them in a row, and it's like, this sounds like you're like almost like yelling at me. You're just like a sort of staccato conversation, and I'm like, if this is what you want, if this is the style you want, that's fine, but I'm letting you know, like, if you sort of mixed it up and you had longer sentences and then shorter sentences, and it's almost like it really truly is it's an artwork, right? It's painting things in a different way, in a different light, starting your sentences in different ways, not starting every sentence with, I, if it's a first person point of view and everything like that. Like, it's so cool. It's so much fun.
And it's like magic when it works, and it's supposed to feel like the best editing, I think, is when no one realizes that it's been done at all, that it's seamless, and that the writing just flows. Like you said, the sentences, there's variety, the cadence is working for the plot points and the what the author wants the reader to feel. Like, the sentences work with the story like that in a very particular way.
Well, and I think it's such a beautiful thing, because it is forever an evolution, right? Not only learning how to do that, learning your style, figuring out your style and your voice and everything like that. But and this is what I always emphasize with my authors, which is, it's an ongoing process, and you never know exactly. It's really hard not to compare yourself, right? You read a beautiful lyrical book, that's sort of your style. You're like, oh my gosh, this book is perfection. Like, how could
Yeah.
I ever write something like this? It's like that author may have a very natural, beautiful style, but you don't know how long it took them to get there, how much they worked and studied and revised, how many books they have in their drawer next to them that got them to where they are. And you also don't know how much of that is collaboration with their editor, which
Yeah.
is, maybe it wasn't as smooth. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, I can 100% tell you it was not as smooth as it is once it's published if they went through an editor, because you're working with them and having outside eyes going, okay, I see what you wanted to say here, but if you shift it this way, XYZ will happen, and you're both working to bring your vision to life. And I think that's just such a beautiful thing, and it makes writing and publishing, as isolating as it can be, it makes it sort of a team effort, or as much of a team sport as all of us introverted reading people. That's as close as we get. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. And I really appreciate it. I absolutely love talking about publishing and copy editing. I will put all of your information down below. So if any of you are interested in reaching out to Erika, you can check that out. It's been absolutely wonderful chatting with you. And for those of you that are here on the YouTube channel, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. And until next week, keep writing.